Hello guys. I wanted to make a video here that's a little bit different than anything I've done in the past. It's sort of a response video, although I want to make it sort of clear here at the beginning. This is not really a response video directly to the person that made this video, because this woman is a feminist and it's not really someone that in general I'd be willing to have any sort of debate with because of, in my view, if you're a feminist, you're too far lost to really have a discussion about real issues with, like, you're going to take the position that women are always the victims and men are basically to blame for everything. But I wanted to address something that in this particular clip this woman said. And again, it's not really about her. I don't want people to like go to her channel and say all kinds of things to her for no particular reason, right? But it's about the argument that she makes in this clip, and I want to thank One Fast Dak for one of his short clips that he posted that contained this clip, or what was more or less this video clip. And I want to talk about why I'm making a response to this and the sort of underlying issue that kind of goes beyond just men's content and the manosphere and all that. That's important with several different things, right? That has sort of a broader context than that. And I want you guys to go ahead and watch this clip. Hopefully I can insert this correctly, and then I will go back to the actual response to this video clip.
Like, how does it affect anyone else? How many people a woman sleeps with? Or how much alcohol she drinks, unless, it's affecting her family and friends, and that's a whole other story. Yeah, I find it insane. I just feel like adults should be allowed to do what they want, as long as they take responsibility for their own actions afterwards. If a woman wants to go around sleeping with 1,000 chads, that's absolutely fine, as long as she practices safe sex, and if she does get pregnant, she acts responsibly about it, and, she gets regular tests and uses condoms and whatever, and doesn't mess with anyone's feelings. I don't see why it's an issue. I just feel like as long as people are being responsible for their own actions and accepting the consequences of them, I don't really see why it matters. We shouldn't police other adults and their behavior.
So as I mentioned, this video response is not really a direct response to this girl herself. I saw the basics of her channel, right? She identifies as a feminist and as a liberal or whatnot. So, I mean, frankly, I've stopped arguing with feminists quite a while back, in a general sense at least. Because really all you're going to get from feminists in terms of trying to discuss issues with them are men are bad, men are to blame for everything, men need to do more, women are always victims, but at the same time, right, they're empowered, and all of these things that make no sense together, right? Women can do anything men can do, but men still victimize women, and we're not doing enough for women. That's what it's always going to devolve into, right? It's not going to be based on facts and reason. So, you have the wage gap myth and mansplaining versus the inability to see your kids in some cases, or, going to prison for child support being overdue, or, all the things that men face, right? False accusations being made, and that being okay because Me Too and Listen and Believe. That's the kind of argument you typically get into with a lot of feminists about any of these issues. So it's not a direct response to her. I really don't really care about her opinion, to be honest. I'm just using what she said as sort of a way to sort of identify a problem that I've seen and to sort of discuss the issue that all of this brings up. So the first thing I want to say is sort of the TLDR, right, kind of response to this idea that, well, why is it that it's everybody else's business if a woman wants to have a high body count, right? If she wants to have sex with a bunch of different men, how is that anybody else's concern? The first response is, well, the problem is women aren't taking responsibility for those choices, right? You can just look around and see the number of women on welfare, single moms in particular, women that are having abortions. That's clearly not a good way to take responsibility, right? That's the worst way imaginable, especially, right, when there's no extenuating circumstances. It's just an abortion of convenience. that's the opposite of taking responsibility for yourself. So that's the main answer to that, right? To get the response, to really provide the direct response to what she's suggesting. The problem is that women don't take responsibility for themselves in these situations, right? They do get pregnant. They do have abortions. They do try to, make men pay for their mistakes and whatnot. Not that it doesn't take two people to create a life, but the point is this idea that, well, so what if a woman has 575 male partners, right? And whatever period of time, it's nobody else's business. Well, as long as she takes responsibility being the key word that I want to go into more here. But the main answer, the easy answer, is they don't. It's because women don't take responsibility, and that's why you have the welfare programs for single moms being so lucrative and requiring so much spending, and that's why you have the child support racket, and that's why you have all these things going on, is because they're not being responsible when they do this to a large extent. So that's the easy answer, right? That's the sort of first response without going into the issue in any more depth. But the real reason that I wanted to make, the primary reason that I wanted to make this video is to say that, well, what is this concept of taking responsibility, right? What does that really entail? Because the long answer to why it matters and why people have the right to discuss this, and even though your choices are your business, why is this issue being brought up in terms of women having all these partners? The long answer is that responsibility sucks, right? If you're actually bound and determined to be a responsible person, that takes a lot of work. Responsibility is not just a task, it's a process. And in cases where you have a kid, when you're not ready to do that, or in cases when you have an abortion, which is, like I say, it's pretty much the most irresponsible option of all, the reality is that actually taking responsibility for yourself is very difficult. And when you put yourself in these situations, there's a good chance that you're not going to take responsibility at all. Men are basically forced to, through some of the stuff that I've already mentioned, right, with child support. And if you are a Chad and you can get as many women as you want, you're bound to have a woman that's upset with you at some point for only using her for sex or wanting sex with her, and she's going to make an accusation against you, and there's a good chance you'll lose your job. There's a good chance that you'll lose your reputation as a decent person, right? If you had that reputation to start off with, she's going to ruin it. You could even end up in prison on a false charge, right? If you're convicted of anything. So that's the first problem, right? Is that really taking responsibility, where the first problem is women don't take responsibility. And the second issue is, even if they're trying to, the reality of the situation is that taking responsibility is not just as simple as, I'm going to be responsible now, I'm going to be accountable, right? You can't tell me what to do, so because I'll just snap my finger and I'll be responsible. That's not the way that it works. And what this reminds me of is some of TFM's content when he was still on YouTube years ago now, where he talked about how women in particular like to use words as magic spells. And that's really what the girl in this clip is doing, right? I want to kind of highlight that. She's saying take responsibility as if that's just something that can be done anytime someone really wants to do it. Or, really decides, yeah, I'll just take responsibility now. When in reality, when you make bad life decisions like this, if you're going to take responsibility for it, it could take your whole life, right? It could derail everything you're trying to do when you have a pregnancy, when you end up having to pay child support from a guy's perspective especially, when you make all kinds of other bad decisions that may not, they're not directly related to reproduction, right? You can be an alcoholic and say, well, if I want to drink, it's just my choice. And she actually mentions alcohol in this clip as well. Like your choices aren't going to affect everybody else, right? The ultimate response, or the reality, in truth is that your actions will affect other people in a negative way when you make poor, reckless choices like that. And so, responsibility is not something that you can just do within a short period of time if you fuck things up enough, right? Like having a child, for example, or multiple children. And so you end up in a situation where you've got to realize who the responsible people are. What does responsible decision making really involve? Well, it involves sort of pulling both ends of the string, right? What do I mean by that? That's a weird thing to say, but what do I mean by that? You make decisions now that acknowledge that, yes, I'm going to try my best to own my shit and be accountable for the choices that I make as a person, to be responsible, but I'm not going to put myself in a situation where that responsibility is going to derail my life. I know that if I'm going to be responsible in the future, and I don't want to be completely miserable as a responsible person, I can't burden myself with negative consequences, right, of really bad choices. And for whatever choices I make that are still not good and have a negative result, we all end up making poor choices at some point. I have, everybody else does. I'll take responsibility for that, but I'm not going to put myself in a situation where I'm realistically going to have my life derailed by a pregnancy or a false accusation or whatever the case may be. And so, for example, what a responsible person will do in terms of alcohol is say, yeah, hey, I know if I get drunk, I do crazy stuff, right? Maybe I make poor sexual choices. Maybe I, try to get in fights and become belligerent. Maybe I'm just wild and crazy and I might lose my job over it. So I'm just not going to get drunk. That's what responsible people do to head off those potentially negative decisions. And the same is true here in terms of sex, right? If I know that there's always a chance, not literally always, right? You can get a vasectomy or whatever, but there's a chance of getting a woman pregnant. There's a chance of having a false accusation from a woman that wanted something other than sex with me. Even if I'm Chad, I'm going to restrain myself and be responsible by being very selective with the women that I want to actually have sex with, right? To have that kind of thing going on, and maybe I just don't do it at all because there's so much of a risk for that backfiring that it, in general, I'm not going to play the field, right? That's what a responsible man, even a man that's a Chad or whatever, or has that potential, right, to get women anytime that he wants. That's what a responsible man will do, given the reality that if you do get a woman pregnant, now being responsible entails all this child support. It entails you having a kid to raise, right? And you as the guy, because of our dynamic, if you want to call it that, between men and women and the overall, position of men in the family structure, where women are the de facto head of the households now, your situation sucks, right? Your life, you could argue that, your life is at least going to be partially ruined by that whole experience. So that's what a responsible guy does. A responsible woman is not going to put herself in a position like that either, right? And for women, and I want to go into the sort of psychology here and some of the differences between men and women at least a little bit to cover that issue. Women greatly associate sex with love, right? Because women can essentially only have kids with one partner, with one man at a time. And so they naturally are going to be bonded with whatever man they're having sex with. If you're dealing with, the average woman or most women out there, when you have sex with 273 different men, your ability to pair bond is going to be gone because you've just totally destroyed and overwhelmed, right? That ability to see sex and love as something deep and meaningful. Now it's just going to be something that is casual and cheap. And the fact of the matter is, on the other side of it, why should a man invest in you, right? If you decide, well, I want to get to this point in just a second, but if you decide I'm going to have a relationship now, why should a man want to do that with you when you've already given it out to all these other men for free, right? And frankly, women don't offer a whole lot. They don't want to do a whole lot in relationships, right? Most women don't want to perform any sort of gender roles. Like, our society has alleviated women through feminism from those roles, and that's fine and dandy, right? But when a woman's sexual access is one of the few things that they're still willing to give, and they've given it to everybody else already, why should you settle down with that? Now, as I just mentioned, the point that I want to get back to here, that's the sort of most damning point of all, doesn't even really have to do with women versus, in contrast to men in particular. The reality is that you can predict other people's choices based on their past choices, right? What's the greatest predictor for what somebody's going to do in the future? Their past choices, their past behavior and actions. Well, if a woman is riding 10 different dicks a month, she's not all of a sudden going to say, you know what, I'm going to settle down now. I'm going to choose the opposite extreme now and just be monogamous with one guy. Realistically, that's never going to happen. And that's not even because of female nature in this case. That's just human nature, right? This is a really sort of dark truth almost. It's almost like another black pill, if you want to call it that. I don't like using that term too much because it's really just a red pill. Whether you want to take it as being, sort of nihilistic or not, it's up to you. It's just reality. But people don't just all of a sudden change their habits, whether you're looking at men or women. And so if a woman's had all these different partners, and then you take into account the fact that society doesn't really punish women much for cheating, right? They can still divorce the guy and take the house and get child custody in a lot of cases. Honestly, why would you want to take that risk as a guy? Marriage and having children is risky to the point where, honestly, I don't support the idea of men doing that and engaging in those institutions and those processes to begin with. But then on top of that, this woman is almost certainly going to cheat on you if she's had that sort of lifestyle and had those sort of habits. So again, what are the realistic ways in which a woman can be responsible for having sex with every Chad in the neighborhood? Well, she can acknowledge that she can't pair bond anymore. She can acknowledge that she's going to be psychologically messed up, in that regard, that she's going to not really associate sex and love as being unique things, right? She's had her fill of that and probably wants more, but not in the sense of really being able to settle down with one guy. So she's got to acknowledge that basically no man that respects himself has a reason to want to be with a woman like that, because it's just, again, even if you don't agree that she's going to be messed up in terms of her pair bonding, her past decisions are going to dictate her future decisions, and she's not going to be loyal to you, right? She's just with you so that she can basically be taken care of and have kids with, men that may not, they may actually be the father of the children that you have and not you yourself, right? That's the other aspect of that. So many things add up, and this is the point, that it's not really even realistic for a woman to take responsibility for making those decisions, right? No reasonably sane person is going to say, well, I'm not going to be able to have a relationship, and I'm probably going to get pregnant at some point. I'm probably going to get an STD, right? I'm probably going to have all these really negative things happen, but I'll just take responsibility for it. The problem is the idea of responsibility is just being used as this sort of magic spell that says, well, everything's okay because I'll just take responsibility, where realistically, it's just not going to happen in these kinds of cases. That's why these single moms are on welfare or getting child support. That's why you have these high number of abortions, sadly, right, in the United States and other Western countries that allow for that. For convenience, right? Not because of extenuating circumstances, just because it's inconvenient to have a child. The problem is this is not realistically ever going to happen, right? People don't take responsibility unless they're forced to, and women, our society facilitates women just basically making men responsible instead, or using the government, right? Men collectively, people collectively through the government, through the state. So the problem with this whole idea of being accountable or being responsible and is no one else's business is that honestly the consequences, the price for taking responsibility for that kind of stuff is so high that you can expect that women are just not going to take responsibility over that. It's easier to just blame men, right? And that's what usually happens instead. The other point that I want to make is that responsible people, I think I've basically already covered this, but responsible people look ahead, right? They manage to be responsible by owning the stuff that they do, but also to a large extent, just as much if not more, just not making these bad decisions in the first place. So a woman that's actually trying to be responsible for herself, what would she look like? Right? Regardless of how, low of a percentage of women this might be in the actual population, right? Theoretically, what would this look like? Hey, I know that I'm young and I could get as many men as I want. That's not me. I don't want to do that. I don't want to screw up my ability to find the right guy. I don't want to end up with a pregnancy that's unplanned. I don't want to end up, with a disease, a venereal disease. I don't want to be in that situation. I'm just going to find a guy, and I may not find the right guy. I may have a relationship and, have sex with a guy and then it doesn't work out, right? But I'm not going to just hook up with Chad because that's unhealthy for me. That's what a responsible woman would actually say and do, right? So this overall idea of, well, I'll just be responsible for anything, it's highly unlikely that people will do that unless they're absolutely forced to, and women today frankly aren't, especially in terms of the decisions they make with men, right? Because it's always men's fault pretty much no matter what. It's far more likely that that's what it'll turn into, that's the result. It's going to be somehow the guy's fault and he needs to pay child support and all that. But again, the issue is magic words. Saying that you're going to take responsibility for something when it's going to derail your whole life. If you are even slightly unlucky and you end up getting pregnant as a woman, having sex with all those men, right? Or you end up psychologically messed up and unable to pair bond. And the one that's really the most definitive thing, which a lot of people don't seem to talk about, is just why would a guy want to actually, well, I've heard this talked about from time to time, but why would a guy sign up for this? Knowing that even if you could pair bond with him, this is just not what you do, right? This is just not your pattern of behavior. Why would a guy want to almost, risk almost certainly getting cheated on just because you're a hot piece of ass and he wants to have a relationship with you now? Why would a reasonably intelligent guy who thinks with his big head put himself in that position? And the answer is those guys won't. They're not going to date a woman that's done all that stuff. And again, does a woman really want to be responsible for that? Nearly every woman out there, does she want to say, you know what, I just want to have fun. I don't care whether I can't pair bond later. I don't care whether no guy wants to seriously date me. I'll take responsibility for it. I'll just be alone, right? I'll just have my bastard children, and I'll just go ahead and be in whatever situation that leads to. I'll just take responsibility for it. That's not realistic, right? The price of that is so high that any woman that actually means that and still, has sex with men and thinks that she's going to have or take responsibility for all that, it's just delusional, right? And the real world result is that she's just going to blame the men that she's been with instead, because society makes that easier. So that's the point that I wanted to make with all this, guys, is that whenever somebody says something like that, you've got to realize the sort of weight of what they're saying and whether it actually adds up or not. Because the reality is that no one really makes women be responsible to a large extent for their bad choices. Men are held to be responsible for their negative choices. And again, this isn't meant to pick on this particular girl. I don't really care about her opinions, honestly, because again, she's a feminist and a leftist, so I don't argue with people in that sort of category anymore. I find that to be useless, honestly. But the main point, again, the easy point is, why is it that this is a concern? Why is it anybody else's business when women have high body counts and have been with, 300 different partners? Even if it's like 10 or 20 partners, I would say that it still applies. That, why is it somebody else's business? Because these women are going to come back and they're going to blame men later. They're not going to take responsibility. The first answer, the easy answer, is just look at the stats, right? You have all these single moms that are getting child support and welfare. You have these abortion rates. Women aren't taking responsibility in these situations when they're riding the cock carousel, when they're with every Chad they can get with. They don't, in general, take responsibility. So the idea that they might is irrelevant. But even looking at it more from the individual level, why would a woman want to take responsibility for that? Why would she make the decision to go through all of that and then say, yeah, I'll just be alone. I can't pair bond, or I can't, no man wants to be with me because no man can trust me knowing my sexual history, but I take responsibility for that. That's not realistic. When you try to put two and two together, just like with a lot of the stuff that I talk about, right? This doesn't really add up, because that's not a reasonable situation to put yourself into, and it's a lot more likely that a girl will just blame men and blame society, patriarchy, whatever the case may be, because responsible people don't make these decisions in the first place, right? A responsible person, both men and women, for different reasons, right? For women, it's pregnancy, the potential for, if you're gonna be responsible, you're gonna have to actually have your life basically completely derailed to raise these children that you're having, right? This unexpected child or children that you're having. And some women, I'm not saying that there are no single moms that try to be responsible, but their lives are much worse because of the decision that they made to bang random men and eventually get pregnant from one of them. But from a guy's perspective, right, you will be held responsible with child support, with potentially a false accusation, right? There's a lot of negatives for men that have sex with as many women as they want to, right? I mean, if they do that, eventually it's going to catch up with them as well. So for different reasons, the result's the same, right? Responsible men and women are going to look at this and say, I'm not going to have an accidental kid. I'm not going to have a false accusation because the woman wanted more than sex and that's all that I wanted, right? I'm just not going to put myself in that situation. That's what actual responsible people do, instead of trying to use these terms as magic words to essentially try to justify doing whatever they want, as if they're going to take responsibility for it later, even when that's not realistic. That's not generally what responsible people do. Responsible people don't, or they do their best to minimize the negative consequences from bad choices in the first place. Then they'll take responsibility for the bad choices that they do make, but they won't try to justify it in this way, right? They won't try to say, I'll just take responsibility, as if that creates some sort of spell and resolves the situation. They just will take responsibility beforehand and, realize that the negative consequences of going through this whole process of pregnancy, or, having all these sexual partners, it's not worth it, and it's not worth doing in the first place.